It's always nice coming home because my warm bed awaits me. Pickles on a polo stick. What is that? I got another card. I got another card. I got another card. Thank you very much. It's a neat card. Joanne, thank you. Username is Serbia Girl, and I'm going to add it with my collection of cards. Thank you. An estimated 10,000 wolves roam Alaska, 200,000 moose, 750,000 caribou, and tens of thousands of more wildlife like lynx, Dall sheep, black bears, grizzly bears, porcupines, and so on. There were 3 reasons I decided to move to Alaska 1 year ago. The variety of wildlife was just one of those reasons. I'm mostly fascinated with wolves and caribou, which is important to this story. The snow was another reason I came to Alaska. And boondocking was the final reason. Deciding where to settle down in Alaska was the most difficult choice. The snowiest part of Alaska is Valdez, but because of the amount of snow they receive, wolves and caribou are extremely scarce in that region. If I moved to where the majority of caribou and wolves would be, in the far north, they have some of the least amount of snowfall. Boondocking is going to be everywhere, but I realized shortly before I came that I was not going to get all 3 of my wishes in one spot no matter where I chose to settle down. As those of you who have watched my videos over the past 15 months already know, I decided I would spend my first winter in Valdez to live in the snowiest city in the US for 1 year. Before I got there, though, I took a road trip across Alaska to help me decide where I would move to the following year. I wound up choosing the interior of Alaska, right outside of Healy and right next to Denali National Park. I felt that that area would get enough snow to satisfy me throughout the winters, and living along the border of Denali, I would possibly see more wildlife than I would see in other parts of the interior. I wound up finding a really comfortable cabin way back in the forest that looked like the perfect piece of paradise for wildlife. But the wildlife never showed up in the 2 months I was there. The most logical reason would be is that on one side of the property was the Nenana River, and it was deep and ran fast, making it nearly impossible for wildlife to cross. On the other side of the property was an extremely steep rock slide, which no animal larger than a cat could climb or come down. My main company in the forest were squirrels, porcupines, and birds. Although the occasional wolf or moose or grizzly bear may have come through, I didn't have the luxury of seeing any. But I was also told a lot of the wildlife does not leave Denali often because it has learned that the park is its safe area where hunters will not kill them. And this brings us back to another reason why there was not as much wildlife in the summer cabin as I had expected. 20 years before I arrived in Healy, there were caribou and moose and bears throughout all of the forests and all along the park's highway, which runs straight through Healy, north to Fairbanks and south to Cantwell. I was told by the locals that back then it was very common to see caribou walking alongside the highway throughout the year. But the caribou, along with other wildlife, began to understand that these areas were not safe, as every time they came here, they left with smaller herds or smaller packs. Mainly the cause of this was hunters, as well as the wildlife being killed by passing cars on the highway. In a way, it's a shame because I could only imagine how living in the summer cabin in the forest, seeing caribou every day, would have been fascinating. But even if you go back and took away the hunters and the traffic on the highway, wildlife often comes and goes and is seldom going to stay in one spot for a very long time. So I'm not really sure there's one thing in particular to blame for me not being able to experience what the locals here experienced every year before I arrived. Some of you may be thinking, you'll probably see more wolves if you move to northern Minnesota or to Colorado, where they started a wolf program a few years ago, relocating and releasing wolves in the northern part of the state. And you may be right. But what I'm learning in Alaska is there's really no good way to choose a place to live where you're going to see more wildlife, unless you want to live 5 hours off grid or on property that is only reachable by an ATV or airplane. And I assume the same goes for any state you live in. You may or may not see much wildlife. The only way you'll truly get to know whether the property is visited often by the wildlife that you wish to see is to live there for a while. In my new home close to town, only time will tell what I see my first winter here. I'm not going to be disappointed because over time I've come to realize you're going to see a little bit of everything in Alaska, but probably not as much as you expected. As well as the 3 occasions that I have seen moose in my first 15 months in Alaska, it's always been a moment of excitement. If I saw the same animals day after day or week after week, the excitement may slowly tend to fade. Although at the moment, I think there will always be a fascination with seeing a free wild animal next to the grocery store. The biggest surprise to me since I've been in Alaska is what I enjoy the most. And it wasn't one of the 3 reasons I decided to move here. Of course, receiving over 400 inches of snow my first winter was everything I was hoping for and more. And seeing the wildlife is as exciting and enjoyable as I had imagined. I unfortunately didn't have time to go boondocking my first summer here due to a variety of reasons that would only bore you. But what I found I enjoyed the most was this. Driving in the interior of Alaska is like driving through a nature lover's wildest dreams. The beauty along the highways and in the horizon will never get old or boring. Every 15 minutes there's a nicer pull-off than the previous one, and you just want to stop at every single one of them over and over, no matter where you're going to or when you have to be there. It doesn't matter where in the interior that you're driving. It all looks the same, yet it all looks entirely different. And because of the lack of traffic in the interior, even during the tourist season, the drives are more enjoyable rather than stress. And you find yourself looking forward to reaching that next pull-off to take a break and to soak in the scenery. About 1 hour away from me is a small restaurant in the town of Nenana. They sell what I would call the best tasting root beer floats in Alaska. One of the reasons is that it's the only place in Alaska I've had a root beer float. But the other reason may be because I get to drive down the park's highway and stop and go as I please along the way. So if someone ever asks me, why do you drive 1 hour for a simple root beer float instead of making it at home? I'll invite them along the next time I go there. No words can describe why better than them seeing it with their own eyes.